none of us are bullish enough on Bitcoin. I think it'll surprise everyone to the upside. We see somewhere between $500 billion and $1 trillion of flows into Bitcoin ETFs. I think that's going to be the major story moving forward until the structured products get their hands on it. It's going to make what the ETFs do look like what the ETFs did to the existing market. Bitcoin is the best performing asset over the last 10, 15 years, yet it is the world's first risk-free asset. Those three functions of money being store of value, medium exchange, and unit of account. The fact is that Bitcoin is the first time in history that you have one asset that is the dominant, the apex predator of all of those three functions of money at the same time.
You are well known. I quickly searched you on YouTube. I quickly searched you on Twitter, and you're well known for crazy high price targets for like 7 billion, 10 billion, 10 million. So I want to definitely get into that, how we get to there and how we can achieve those numbers with Bitcoin. But first, I always try to start at the basics, because I'm well aware that at every Bitcoin conversation, especially now in the bull run, there's so many new people are coming in. There's probably 1, 2, maybe 10, 20 guys in the conversation like, but I don't understand Bitcoin. So maybe let's get first quickly in, why is Bitcoin important? What is Bitcoin doing for you personally, and what is doing for society? And then let's move on to how Bitcoin adoption will grow in the next time. So why Bitcoin?
Why Bitcoin? It's a great question, and it's easy to get lost on, why we Bitcoin. But I think, like anyone else, the initial response to Bitcoin was an opportunity for a trade, an opportunity to make money, an opportunity that would enable you to outperform the other investments that are available in the market. And my day-to-day is spent looking at investment opportunities all day. And back in 2016, I looked at Bitcoin, and it was a highly fragmented, highly speculative asset relative to today's Bitcoin that we know. And I initially got into Bitcoin as an opportunity to improve investment outcomes. And I thought, look, there's put a low weighting or asset allocation to Bitcoin, and this could substantially outperform the other investments in the portfolio. I thought back then there was a chance that this could fall over and go to zero. So obviously we had that caveat over the thought that, this investment could go to zero for clients. And we asked all of our clients to sign disclaimers confirming that, hey, this is a speculative asset. But fast forward 8 years, and Bitcoin has really changed my outlook on a whole host of things, including what a good investment opportunity looks like. It's totally redefined my way of thinking about risk. Although Bitcoin is a highly volatile asset, I believe it is the risk-free asset of the world. And this is where, over the next 10 years, as we see corporate and institutional adoption of Bitcoin, the rest of the world will come to see that this is the risk-free opportunity. This is the risk-free asset of the world. But in starting with a financial outcome that I wanted to achieve in getting into Bitcoin, I guess, the primary driver of that is fundamentally greed. And then you go down the rabbit hole, you spend time here and realize that Bitcoin really does solve so many other problems that we have in society. And there have been, absolute stalwarts of the industry who have written extensively on this. And, I think of Safadine with his fiat standard and Bitcoin standard. I think of Jeff Booth with his price of tomorrow. I think of Knut and his work and books that he's done. Three great authors in that capacity that have really helped shape a whole host of opinion on Bitcoin and move the needle forward. And this is where, you come for the number, go up, you stay for the revolution, I think is the too long didn't read of Bitcoin.
Yeah, definitely. And it's also like, because people are like, oh, how can Bitcoin fix this? How can Bitcoin fix this? It's so easy because everything we're doing has some transactions to it, some financial or some live energy transaction to it. And this is called money in the end of the day. And Bitcoin fixes money. And so with fixing money, it fixes so many issues coming with that. And still a lot of people, I think, misunderstand Bitcoin for some, in the West, probably it's a luxury item. It's something that only rich people doing. Then what do you think is like the most common misconceptions? Why is Bitcoin sometimes so misunderstood? Is it the volatility? What do you think is like the greatest hurdle now for like understanding Bitcoin in the mainstream?
Robin, that is a very good question, and I haven't been asked that before. I think if I were to think about this, I think the number one reason why there is a misunderstanding of Bitcoin is because it breaks so many norms. It is a paradox. If you think about this on many levels, Bitcoin is, the best performing asset over the last 10, 15 years, yet it is the world's first risk-free asset. Yeah, that in itself is a paradox. Then you think about the fact that it's, wildly volatile, but risk-free. And it's like, this doesn't make sense. And then you go through and think about a whole host of other things and I guess preconceptions that Bitcoin breaks in the fact that, for the first time ever, we have the ability to solve the Byzantine generals problem. We have the first time, it's the first, discovery or invention of, digital scarcity. Digital scarcity was an oxymoron up until Bitcoin was invented, because there was no such thing as digital scarcity until the Byzantine general problem was solved and the ability to create digital scarcity. And this is where there are so many of these paradoxes in Bitcoin that it is really difficult to comprehend. And unless you study it acutely and spend a lot of time looking at it, these paradoxes, most people just throw out without understanding, and it becomes too hard. There are too many facets to Bitcoin that you really need to master or understand in order to get a more complete knowledge or understanding of Bitcoin. And I look at some of the things that you need to understand from off the top of my head. You need to have an understanding of sound economic policies. You need to understand finance. You need to have some form of understanding of computer science, distributed networks, and that's just to name but a few. And who on earth has that variety of skill set, and who on earth is interested in those 5 different things to put all of this together to say, oh my goodness, this is the answer to my problems? And those 5 different things can solve every problem on earth. It's farcical, it's fanciful to think that can actually happen. But this is where going down that Bitcoin rabbit hole is probably one of the most rewarding intellectual journeys that I've had. And I've spent far more time studying Bitcoin than I did for a degree of finance. And now my day-to-day is spent on Bitcoin, and it's an absolute delight because it's a never-ending rabbit hole.
Yeah, it's always fascinating for me that it opens up another rabbit hole, and it's like I'm studying now now it's 4 years that I'm in Bitcoin, really. So it's always every year there's something new coming up. There's some new rabbit hole. There's something new to it. There's a new book. There's some new aspect to it. It's fascinating. And this is also like the topic of today, because we have this crazy technology that runs up in price, crashes down in price, runs up in price, crashes down in price, and the base is always getting bigger and bigger. The highs is also getting always bigger and bigger. And when normal people that are not done the research see this and like, what is this? And then there are people coming out and saying it goes to 1 million. Then there are people coming out, it goes to 10 million. Then you are coming out, it goes to $7 billion. So I think people that didn't do the research work just will call you crazy, I guess. I don't know how was your experience with that. I'm really interested in then how do you come from that number? We are now like 72,000 euros. Maybe we will release this podcast in 2-3 weeks. So probably maybe we are already at 100,000. Let's see where we are in 2-3 weeks. How do we come from that number now to like 1 million to 10 million to even more than that to like billions, because even from 1 million to 1 billion, this is like a huge step in valuations. How do you imagine we are coming to those numbers?
There's a really short answer to this, and I can give you an extended one. The too long didn't read of this is that the world has a collateral problem at this point in time, and Bitcoin is the best form of collateral ever invented. My expectation is not only is it the best form of collateral, it is the best form of money ever invented. And we have those three functions of money being store of value, medium of exchange, and unit of account. The fact is that Bitcoin is the first time in history that you have one asset that is the dominant, the apex predator of all of those three functions of money at the same time, with the ability to be collateral. Now, all of a sudden, that completely redefines the space as far as how much wealth can be absorbed by Bitcoin. And this is where probably a better way of thinking about it is, what our friend Jeff Booth talks about, where he says it's impossible to value the future system from within the existing one. And this is where what I try to do is put a valuation framework around Bitcoin to highlight how absurd it's going to get very quickly. And the thinking and the rationale on, say, a $7 billion Bitcoin is quite simply, once people understand what this is and we have the bulk of it tied up in collateral and we don't have the need to sell it because we've got a functioning credit market on top of Bitcoin, then Bitcoin will facilitate the entire global trade because it's the best form of money ever invented. Now, I don't think it's important to do that in order for it to go 50 or 100x up from here, but if it's facilitating daily global trade, we have $6.3 trillion of daily global trade, and we only have 900 Bitcoin minted on the day. That gives us a $7 billion Bitcoin. If you divide 6.3 trillion by whatever's minted on the day, which is going to have to facilitate whatever the daily global trade is, then we get to a ridiculous number of $7 billion. And then this is where the numbers get exponential very quickly, is that, that is assuming that there's a static GDP number. So assuming no human growth moving forward. And then in addition to that, you have a halving period every 4 years where we're just about to go into one on the 20th of April, where 900 Bitcoins minted per day are going to drop to 450. And all of a sudden, it's not going to be a $7 billion Bitcoin. It's going to be a $14 billion Bitcoin, by a fair market value assumption of what I've laid out. And, don't get caught up in the number. No one cares about the number, but get caught up in the thinking about, well, if what I'm telling you is correct when it comes to, why it's the best asset, why it's the best form of money, why it's the best form of collateral, it only makes sense in a logical progression to think that these things will play out. Now, what I don't know is how long it's going to take to play out, but I'm pretty certain as long as Bitcoin keeps functioning, then that trajectory is certain. It's just a matter of when it's going to approach those numbers.
And this assumption also it's crazy for me to think about, because when we come to those numbers, I don't know if we value Bitcoin even in US dollars anymore. Like it's like from here on out, we are thinking about that, but you're also saying Bitcoin is then the base layer and we're having a functioning credit system on top of that. So you're saying that something like a US dollar can be on top of Bitcoin, like on the gold standard, or how do you think this will work out? Okay.
Yeah, I do. I think it will. So, and that's the ability to basically print Bitcoin to infinity. Because the second you remove that, then you're capped to whatever human growth is or GDP is.
So we will have like Bitcoin as a base layer, just as like with the gold standard, and then US governments or central banks will buy Bitcoin as a base layer and mint US dollars or whatever they will call it on top of Bitcoin, like as a layer 2, 3, 4 to Bitcoin. This is like how do you think about that?
Yeah, that's exactly what I think will happen. And this is where, for the first time in history, you're going to have the ability to, and this, where we gear our clients up for thinking about this in the longer term. to avoid having to sell Bitcoin, you need a functioning credit market on Bitcoin. And so how would that work? Well, if you have a functioning credit market on Bitcoin, that serves two purposes. Firstly, it allows you to never sell your Bitcoin. So you're not going to be incurring any taxes from a capital gains tax perspective with your government or relative jurisdiction. And secondly, and most importantly, it's going to ensure that no Bitcoin comes to market for sale. So it's going to further increase the pressure on the price rising because there's no supply. So it's of critical importance that those things come to market if we're interested in number go up technology, because that's going to be one of the forcing functions to ensure that supply doesn't come back to market.
Yeah, that's also like how I think about it. I'm not sure how layer 2 and US dollars on top of Bitcoin will work, but I'm 100% certain that Bitcoin will be like the base layer, and everything on top will compete with each other, and we will see how this will play out. I'm curious now, how do you see the adoption going for that? How is the next step? Because we had like 2020, the first publicly traded company with MicroStrategy coming in. Now it's like 60, 70, 80 companies that do that. There will be a lot more companies now coming in, also with the Bitcoin ETF. Then we have 2021 with El Salvador, the first country that kind of adopted a Bitcoin standard. Of course, they're not fully only on Bitcoin. They also have US dollar, but they are far ahead in the story. Then we have this year, the Bitcoin ETF. What do you imagine in the next like 10 years happening adoption wise without the price? Just like what milestones do you think we hit, or do we have to hit to like progress in that adoption to hit those crazy numbers?
I think we're a lot closer than people think. And I think I had a conversation with a friend earlier this week, and he'll know who it is. But if you think about the fact now that institutions are here and they have the ability to hold it, purchase it via an ETF, that's a safe structure. I look at the financial carnage that was created during the GFC by standardizing and packaging up residential-backed mortgage securities in the US. Was the biggest financial collapse that we'd seen, and that was because they securitized all of the lending in the US. It was a structured product type thing. Now, if you look at structured products, Bitcoin is the ideal product to put in a structured product if you're a structured product guy. And if anyone's listening out there, then I urge you to think about doing this, because a product I was talking about earlier today that would leave swathes of institutional money just running for this type of product was talking about how you could have a principal protected note in a structured product. So it's an institutional product. But can you imagine being able to have a capital guaranteed note for, say, 500 million, or call it 10 billion in round numbers? You can go out and buy 5-year treasuries at roughly 4 or 5% to capital guarantee that. So you use 80% of the $10 billion to go and buy, US government treasuries. That is your principal protected part of the structured product. But the important thing is, with the remaining 20% that you haven't invested, you can then go and buy Bitcoin to juice up the returns of this product. So you're going to sell a $10 billion note or structured product, and you're going to have 2 billion going straight into buying Bitcoin. Now, during the GFC, these guys sold tens of trillions of dollars of this stuff pre-GFC. Now, it's still a multi-trillion-dollar market. But what happens when that type of capital starts flowing into Bitcoin? Now, everyone's excited about the ETFs and, $500 million a day, that's amazing. For these guys who do this, product structuring, they could do $20 billion a week with their eyes shut. It wouldn't even touch the sides. Those things, that product would run out the door like everyone would want it, because, by my calculations on a 50% CAGR, that would juice the returns of this structured note. Can you imagine a principal protected note that could give you a 18% return per annum, risk-free.
Wow.
That's based on my calcs with the 50% CAGR of 20% of that note in Bitcoin and 80% in the the risk-free principal protected US Treasury. Now, the only assumption I'm making there is that the US government's going to pay its debt. So all of a sudden, this totally redefines the demand metrics of what we're seeing with the ETFs. This puts basically on steroids. If the ETFs are doing $500 million to $1 billion a day, these guys could be doing $10 billion a day with their eyes shut. And this is just one product stream, not multiple. This is just one. So, and I know there is a huge need for, this type of thing out there because we've got a collateral problem globally and we don't have the ability to earn, and there's multiple other problems with it. And, this is, one of the solutions to basically create equity in the market. Now, what that would do is that would drive the price of Bitcoin through the roof and up exponentially, but it wouldn't be at the cost of the bond market. It wouldn't be at the cost of the stock market. It wouldn't be at the cost of the property market. So you're going to cause the least damage by rewarding a very small minority of the community, i.e. Bitcoiners, to solve all of your financial woes and, the debt to GDP ratio problem that you've got now.
Do you have of course, timing is always so hard to predict, but do you have a rough timeline where this will happen within the next 5 years, or do you see this probably even happen really soon? Because you said in the early this, you see it happening way sooner than most think. Do you have some imagination when this could happen?
I think there's the opportunity for this to happen in the next 5 years. And if that's the case, if that happens in the next 5 years, we'll see, $10 million a coin in the next 5 years if that type of product gets any traction.
This could also then break this 4-year cycle thing. If this is actually bringing so much in, then I think Michael Seyr talked about that. Your models will be destroyed once the big guys come in, something like that. Do you
Correct.
think this will break
right. Yep. At some point in time, in some point in time, we break the model to the upside. When enough people figure out what Michael Saylor's doing, or this structured product, and they can print and then juice the returns of these bonds. And the only thing we have to rely on is for Wall Street to be greedy. Now, I look at that and think that's a really safe bet. That's like a duck to water. That's one of the easiest bets we could make. And Bitcoiners can get behind supporting them being as greedy as they want, because it's going to lift all our boats. It's going to be a rising tide for every Bitcoiner out there.
21 Bitcoin is Bitcoin only from day one, and they teach and preach self-custody. This is my go-to exchange when someone asks me, oh, where can I buy my Bitcoin from? This is the easiest entry for Bitcoiners. And if you want lower fees, plus at the same time support this podcast, use code Robin and click the link in the description. I'm asking myself a lot what the implications of that will be, because we're now when we see all this stuff happening in the future, we're now still so early, and it's now still such a bargain to get into Bitcoin. What do you think will happen? Let's firstly go broad. What do you think will happen with the economy? What do you think will happen with governments, with all the structure that we have now? Do you think Bitcoin will bring a big change in that?
Enormous change. Absolutely. I think you look at, I look at this from a personal level, and I just extrapolate out what that means for the rest of society. But I can tell you Bitcoin has brought enormous change to me personally in many ways. Obviously from a financial freedom perspective, from a risk management perspective, how we look at investments, how we allocate. There is just a whole host of changes that it's brought, as well as an outlook on the future. It's made me very optimistic on the future, because for the first time we have genuine hope that is ubiquitous across the world, that anyone can access. And this is the opportunity for the human race to access that level of hope and opportunity for everyone on Earth. And this is something that has never been achieved before. And this is the great hope that I have, that Bitcoin has the ability to help people move up that Maslow's needs hierarchy, drag people out of poverty, help people put food on the table, and then with that they can start developing longer term outlooks. And when we have 8 billion people on Earth self-actualizing, what is the human race capable of when we are all on that level? And Bitcoin is the first instrument, tool, whatever you want to call it, that has the ability to unite and unify 8 billion people's incentives. So for that, and I'm very hopeful, and this is what brings me such hope for the future of humanity, is that we have this tool that we can all have common ground on. And because it's so important within society, and that it's a mechanism of exchange or communication, i.e. exchanging and communicating value, this is intrinsic to every human on Earth. So we are all going to place huge importance to this in our lives, and it's going to give us the ability to have a middle ground for every human on Earth. So that's a little deep, but I think it offers the opportunity to do that in the future that nothing else has. Nothing else comes close on that.
That's interesting because we have, when we see all the people rising with poverty, and then we see the mind changes that also happen when people adopt Bitcoin and have this low time preference money. I'm also wondering what could happen to governments, because then they have less or no capabilities of print money. You said in the beginning that you imagine a credit system on top of Bitcoin, but obviously with a sound money as a standard, with a base layer, it will limit their capabilities, I guess. So do you see like governments going in a different direction, becoming more service orientated towards the citizens and less less regime like?
It's my sincere hope that they do, because it'll be in their best interest. And most importantly, we forget that governments are meant to serve the people. So it would actually be a huge improvement on the service offering that they're currently making by adopting a Bitcoin standard. And this is the ironic thing, is that by adopting a Bitcoin standard, they would actually be able to deliver better services quicker, faster, cheaper than if they ignore it. And this is going to be a sort of a sticking point, I think, for a lot of governments moving forward, that they're going to be very threatened by Bitcoin because it has, the ability to expose, a lot of things that aren't really common knowledge in society, such as inflation and debasement of currencies, money printing and theft. But for those countries that adopt it, we're going to see a stark contrast to the countries that shun it. And this is where, for your sake and my sake, I hope our governments are quick to adopt it, because those who adopt it first will benefit from it.
Yeah, and I think there's a saying that you cannot ban Bitcoin, but you can only ban yourself from Bitcoin. And I think this is what will happen. There will be governments and countries that will try to get Bitcoin out of the systems, and they will fail. I mean, we have the best example with China. They're trying to get rid of Bitcoin since a long time. From the mining perspective, they obviously failed till now. But then we have countries like El Salvador, where the president is top down really bullish on Bitcoin. Then we have Nigeria, which has an amazing adoption, grassroots adoption from bottom up. And I think people will just, first of all, try to make it happen somehow, to get the Bitcoin standard in their own country. And if this is not happening, then they can still move somewhere where it's possible. And if you ban Bitcoin, the only thing you're doing is basically getting the Bitcoin capital out of the country to some other country. And then is where the game theory starts coming in, I guess. This is how it will play out.
I agree wholeheartedly with that. It's going to be fun to watch.
Definitely. This is kind of also the reason that I did the podcast, because I feel like when you see the internet adoption in like 1995, and you have a podcast which is like daily interviewing people on the topic of internet, would be fun to watch how this all plays out with Amazon and everything. So I just want to document everything and interview all the Bitcoiners on the podcast. And especially it will be interesting how these Bitcoiners that are now so big in Bitcoin will go on in the future? Do you see like when because now we have Bitcoiners who can afford a whole Bitcoin. This will be something really rare in like 10, 20 years. People that afford maybe even 10 Bitcoin. If you got in early, maybe they even have 100 Bitcoins. This will be such a huge amount of money. Do you think this has any implications? Of course, this has implications for them, but do you imagine anything going on with Bitcoiners that are really early on? Do you have to have special protection? Like, what do you see on that? Anything going on?
No, I don't think. Bitcoiners are going to need special protection. I don't think they're going to need um, anything in that regard, and I don't think it's going to be ostentatious consumption, because most Bitcoiners end up becoming absolutely infatuated with Bitcoin, to the point where most Bitcoiners I know have a name for each of their Bitcoins. That sort of love for an asset like nothing else I've seen. And I say that facetiously, but this is where in a fiat world you are encouraged to consume, and there is all sorts of outrageous consumption, whether it be extravagant boats, $1 million bottles of wine, you name it. There's an extravagance to it that is celebrated in fiat culture as a way of, hey, I've made it. But in Bitcoin, no one is incentivized to spend like that. And I don't see any Bitcoiners who are, going to carry on like that in perpetuity, thrilled with how rich they are. So they go and spend, money on, totally ostentatious things that, don't require or don't improve or have any real utility. And this is where I think Bitcoin is going to usher in an age of financial conservatism, where people are incentivized to save. And most Bitcoiners I know are ultra conservative when it comes to spending. They really value their Bitcoin, and in order to sell it and spend it, there's got to be something really important that they want, or really meaningful, that's going to change themselves personally. So I think the ability to store wealth in Bitcoin is going to be critical. And the fact that you can store wealth in Bitcoin and it's going to go up faster than anything else is going to incentivize those people who are holding a lot of it not to spend a lot of it. And this is where I think, from my experience with money, is the only reason, not the only reason, but one of the major causes of people being jealous of other people's financial position is when people rub it in their noses through outrageous spending, call it belligerent, excess. That is when people look at that and think, hey, that's really shitty. I'm struggling, but you get to go and flash everything around. With the Bitcoiners I know, there's just a very deep-seated conservatism with not wanting to be that person. And this is where, in addition to that, every Bitcoiner I've met has wanted to help their friends, their family, their communities, uplift them and improve their situation. And this is where, rather than the spending side of things on, the stupid consumption, Bitcoin and the wealth that it brings enables all Bitcoiners to change the financial outcomes and trajectory of their close community. And this is where, rather than having concern about being a wealthy Bitcoiner, there's going to be the opportunity for Bitcoiners to dramatically improve their communities and the outcomes that they're achieving and help uplift everyone. So I'll take the flip side of that and bet on humanity.
It's a very beautiful way to think about it, I think. And also, I fully agree with that, because I see when I talk with Bitcoiners, and you know myself, the guest on the podcast, I talk with other Bitcoiners offline. They are all really, they are in there so early because they have a mission to better something. They want to do something good, and they all come in, as you said in the beginning, for number go up technology, but they somehow stay for this revolution. And those people that are greedy, those people that are focused on money, they leave. They come in and they leave again, and then they are going in this altcoin casino, the shitcoin casino. And this is, I think, a good way to think about, because the true Bitcoiners that are Bitcoin only, they are here for something great, and this is amazing. But then when we have now Bitcoiners are getting wealthy, having a lot of stacks, but also being there for the community, I think it's important that we take our Bitcoin seriously, because if we lose them, or we get hacked, or whatever happens with our Bitcoin, then we end up in a situation where we cannot help. Like, if you don't have Bitcoin, it's like even if you accumulate a lot of Bitcoin, what helps when you lose it again? And there are so many stories out there. I also recently interviewed Rick, who lost 25 Bitcoin. I interviewed people that lost Bitcoin, and even people said, like, you're not a real Bitcoiner if you didn't lose most of your Bitcoin. But yeah, I think we can avoid those kind of situations to make sure that we keep our Bitcoin. And there are great solutions out there. But a little bit the problem I see is that there are so many good solutions, and a lot of different solutions and ways we can do it on there. What are your like general advices or general tips and tricks for people to think about self-custody? And do you also see like a difference in the self-custody solution depending on how many Bitcoin you store?
That's a great question. I think obviously the ultimate is not your keys, not your coins. So you want some form of self-custody, I think, is the ultimate. If we're looking at number go up technology too, the best thing you can do for helping number go up is to self-custody your coins, get them off exchange, and ensure that your coins aren't getting rehypothecated to suppress the price. Personally, and this is where anyone who's down the rabbit hole in Bitcoin and trying to self-custody, I don't want to push my opinions on them, because I understand that in Bitcoin, and particularly self-custody, there's no solutions but only trade-offs. And I can talk to what we do at the Bitcoin Advisor, which has a perfect track record of not losing a single Bitcoin, but we leverage off expertise from a number of professionals, and this is how we can deliver a service to clients that ensures that even if they wouldn't even know what a hardware wallet is, we can get them self-custody in a collaborative custody environment, and we can ensure that they're not going to lose their coins, they're not going to get rugged, they're not going to suffer from a phishing attack, they're not going to have friends over who find 24 seed words, walk out the door and then empty their wallets. And this is where I think, for me, the collaborative custody setup is an ideal way of storing large amounts of Bitcoin, because you have no single point of failure in your setup. And so the very unique thing about the Bitcoin Advisor that we've managed to do is we've managed to leverage multi-sig solutions across the market and remove the single point of failure. So if we think that Bitcoin's going to billions of dollars per coin, and it's going to happen a lot quicker than we think, then I'm certain that people are going to think very differently about their self-custody, and they're going to spend a lot more time on it. It's going to take up a lot more headspace, and this is something that I've spent the last 8 years delivering to clients across the globe, that by doing this collaborative custody setup and custody for clients, we've been able to go through 3 probates now where sadly clients have passed, but despite the fact that they were self-custodying their Bitcoin, we were able to safely transfer that Bitcoin to their families. And this is a track record that I'm exceptionally proud of, that we have been able to support all of our clients in that capacity and removed every single point of failure. So that's probably the ultimate, and this is where we have a stack of resources on our website. If anyone's curious about doing it themselves, then there's a protocol up there that you can leverage off our understanding and what we've done in the last 8 years. And if there's anything that's unclear there, we've got a host of resources on the website that we want to make sure that if anyone's in Bitcoin now, we want to make sure that not only are they obviously stacking more coin, but we want to make sure that they're not going to blow that opportunity in the event of an untimely death, or alternatively a misunderstanding of the technology behind it and how to safely self-custody. So we make all of those resources available for free, that anyone can go in and have a look and hopefully have some ideas on how to improve their own self-custody with that. And if they ever want to talk to us, there's a stack of advisors there who know exactly how this protocol works, and we'd love to help if you don't want to do it yourself.
And I think this helps a lot. Like, obviously you can find all the information yourself. But even if you have your information by yourself, even if you have a good self-custody setup, it even helps to just talk with an expert, with an external source, and who does not know your personal situation. And you can tell them, this is my setup. Do you think there are any improvements? Do you think there are any weak points? Like, even to just check up on your self-custody solution. That I highly recommend people taking their self-custody serious. Whatever they are doing, there's so many services, so many solutions out there, and so many materials on that. But my most important thing is always take it seriously and do it before you get extremely rich. It might be too late afterwards.
True.
So, and maybe to end the podcast off before we get into our end routine, what do you see as an outlook happening this year? Do you see anything crazy happening this year? Do you have a price prediction for the end of the year? Do you have any outlooks for Bitcoin in 2024?
I think we're going to have continued strong demand from the institutional side of things. I think that demand is only going to continue to grow. If I think about the journey that I've been on for the last 8 years with my clients, I can tell you that the numbers that everyone's putting forward are ultra conservative. I think last time I checked, no one believed that there'd be $60 billion of flows this year into the Bitcoin ETFs. I wouldn't be surprised in the next 2 years if we see somewhere between 500 billion and $1 trillion of flows into Bitcoin ETFs. I think that's going to be the major story moving forward, until the structured products get their hands on it. So once structured products get their hands on this thing, then it's going to make what the ETFs do look like what the ETFs did to the existing market. The market is just infinitely bigger, because now we're dealing with institutional bond markets. And what's really odd about this is that two things are going to play out, and this is where the exponentiality of the Bitcoin price is going to really become apparent, is that as the price of Bitcoin goes up, bigger players who play in much different scales can now get involved with Bitcoin. So it's like if I describe this, it's like an upside down pyramid that, at the moment we're near the tip of it at the bottom. So we've only just gone up to the next layer as far as institutional money goes. Then we're going to go up another layer where there's a different layer of institutions, and we're looking at structured products and the like. And then there's a layer above that when it comes to governments and central banks. So we've got multiple layers to get to. And when you overlay that with the fact that we're seeing demand for Bitcoin and the supply of it, more importantly, diminish. So we've got a hard cap. Everyone knows it's 21 million and that's it. But what most people in traditional finance don't really understand is that available supply, as that increasing credit comes to market, is like a traditional triangle. So at the moment, there was a huge amount of Bitcoin available 10 years ago. Less than 14 years ago, there was Bitcoin Faucet, which you put in your email and they'd send you free Bitcoin. That's how cheap it was. People were literally giving this thing away. And so it was, there was more than enough to go around. But as people have realized what this thing does and what it can do and the applications of it, it's getting increasingly scarcer. So now we're getting to the pointy end of the supply where there's not a lot of supply, but we are having the largest pools of capital coming to Bitcoin. And so what's that going to do? That creates the exponentiality of the Bitcoin price. So this is where I look at this and think a lot of people don't really comprehend the fact that there is so little Bitcoin available for these new pools of capital, which are significantly bigger than the ETFs that we've seen come into market. So really, probably none of us are bullish enough on Bitcoin over the next 5 to 10 years, and I think it'll surprise everyone to the upside.
Nobody is ready for what's Bitcoin going to do. I think yes, I totally agree with that one. I think it's crazy to think about what can happen. We having an end routine in the podcast where the previous guest asks a question to the next guest without knowing who is the next guest. It's a little bit like the blockchain, like the guests are somehow connected to each other.
Oh, that's cool.
Really, I love that thing. I stole it from the diary of a CEO who was not in Bitcoin, not in anything of that, but I loved this, and I was like, this is like the blockchain. The question to you is, and it's completely unrelated to anything we talked about today, and this is what I like about those questions. Who do you think will win the presidential election in the USA this year?
Boy, that's a nasty question. I want to find out after who asked that. But boy, oh boy, that's such a tough thing to answer because I look at it and I think it's got to be Joe Biden, but only because Trump will probably get murdered before he gets the presidency. So I shouldn't joke about that because it's a horrible thing to think, but sadly. That's a 50-50. If Trump can make it to being elected, he will more than likely get up. But Joe Biden stands for re-election. He's got a really good chance of winning too. So what a tough question. That's a nasty question, Robin.
Yes. I like this kind of questions because it comes from someone else, so it's not my question, but it's always interesting to see, and with not knowing who is the next guest, because I try to make questions for the guest. So then there's one question coming up which is completely outside of the guest. Sometimes it's fitting really well, but most of the time it does not fit well. But it's an interesting, yeah. But I appreciate your answer, and I appreciate also your time. I think it was a great insight in your thinking of Bitcoin. It was a great insight for people wanting to learn more about Bitcoin in general. And yeah, before I let you go, where can people find you the best? Where can people get in touch with you, ask you questions the best way?
Probably one of two ways. The website is www.thebitcoinadvisor.com, and that is advisor with an ER. So, or if you Google search Bitcoin Advisor, we pop up for that. So there's a stack of resources there. You can book meetings with me to run through your self-custody setup. And alternatively, I'm on Twitter at Peter BTC Advisor with an ER again. DMs are open, so shoot me an email, shoot me a DM. Happy to help, and excited to help anyone who wants to improve their self-custody setup or talk Bitcoin. So thank you.
Perfect. Thank you for being on, Peter.
Robin, it's an absolute pleasure. Appreciate your time.